good evening. Thank you. I'm back home in Wiradjuri country. I actually do welcome to country in Gadigal country in Sydney and Redfern. They accept me for that as we are custodians of the land. And I always say I'm Wiradjuri, I'm from Cowra, I'm from the Lachlan Valley, the Galera, and I always ask people and they always say, yes, beautiful country. And indeed it is. I'm the youngest child of 11 children that my parents, Louisa Agnes Simpson, who married Lockie Ingram, so we had 11 children. Unfortunately, there were 7 girls and 4 boys. Unfortunately, all my brothers have passed away. And this year I've lost Sister Pamela, and last year we lost our older sister Sylvia. Sylvia's story is magnificent in itself as well. She was actually the first Aboriginal student to go to school in the town, and it was a bit of an experiment to see if the Aboriginal children could succeed in the town school. Prior to that, there was a school on the mission, because Aboriginal kids were not allowed to go into the town school. And her story is that she ended up being, her funeral was at St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. It seats 2,000 people, and that church was full. And it had people like the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, it had the federal member, Tanya Plebiscite, the then Premier, Christina Keneally, the Deputy Commissioner of Police, Catherine Byrne, and of course our friend, the Governor. And these people were all personal friends of my sister Sylvia. And they went there to honour life and her story. So there are some wonderful people around who do some wonderful things. And I'm very proud of being a Wiradjuri woman. I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm very proud of coming from Cowra. And I tell you what, life was not easy on the reserve. Can you hear that? Hello? Oh, some of us have got a little bit of mucko hearing problem. Sorry about that. So my story, I think, is not so magnificent as Caroline explained it, but opportunities have come to me. I made a decision quite young in my life that if the door opens, have a look and see what's behind it, because you just never know. As a matter of fact, being born at Cowra, I understand I was born on the same day as our mayor here. That is my twin. I hope he's good looking. I haven't met him. And Peter Davidson. I was told the 3 of us were born at the same time at Cowra Hospital. And I'm only 21.
Well, you must be wrong. Bill's 22.
Okay. I don't know that. But I have to meet those 2 gentlemen. I just hope they're handsome. So, life for me on the mission, around the mission, as a child, for me it was fantastic. Because my family was there. But I remember going to, if I chop and change, that's okay. But I remember going to Teachers College at Sydney University. I went to Teachers College there, and I remember, because I always tell my story, I always share the story because I think that's important. And one of my classmates said, well, why didn't you just walk off the reserve if it was so bad? And I thought about that. I thought, okay, there may have been a lot of things that wasn't good about it, but that's where my family is. That's where my mother's country is. That's where my culture is. That's my connection. Where else was I going to go? And it was always good. It was fun. We may not have had running water on the reserve. And when I was born, we just had little red huts. And again, and I'll swap about the stories about the reserve and my family members, but I always remember my sister Sylvia telling me about the old red huts. And so it was 4 walls, and it had it was tin, and so Sylvia said when she grew up, all she wanted was a glass window, a window with a pane, with a glass pane in it, because In the summertime, it was like that corrugated iron stuff, no? And in the summer it was so hot, and in the winter it was so cold. And I remember we even lived, my family, before I was born, lived just off the mission in a little humpy, sort of, you know, with dirt floor. So when I think about me coming from Iran mission to graduate from Harvard University in Cambridge, I often think, oh my goodness, how did I do that? And I had to leave I had 3 children at the time, and I left my children back in Sydney at home with my mother and my other sister Millie. And when I got to Los Angeles, my father had passed away here, and they brought him back to Cowra and buried him from Cowra. So I couldn't go to my father's funeral. But you know, these things, if you sit back and wonder why, you know, you may never know. So I always, when the door is open, just do that. But if I can just take you back a little bit, because, you know, as a kid in Cowra, I was separated from the rest of the town. I lived on the reserve, that's where my family was. I walked, we didn't have the bus, I walked from Irandin across the old bridge, not the new bridge here, to go to school. And that's what I did. I went to school and I went home. And I didn't think about it much as a kid. But then as I grew up, I learned about what had happened to our people, to the Aboriginal people. Not just here in Cowra, but the policies of the government towards Aboriginal people and what had happened. And then if you take it right back, this country was founded on a concept called terra nullius. And the idea of terra nullius, when the colony was set up, that there was no human beings who lived on this land. And years down the track we have Eddie Marber, who did native title, who said that was a myth. But it took a long, long time. It took from 1788 until 1993 to say, yes, there were actually human beings living on this land. And indeed, in 1967, we, as Aboriginal people, with the support of a lot of non-Aboriginal people, had to go to the Australian public, right across this country, to ask the Australian public if we could be citizens of this country. 1967. We were not counted in the census. We were considered under the Fauna and Flora Act. So some of these things, you know, as a kid on the mission I didn't know these things. It wasn't till later that I grew up and I started to learn. I went to school, because I never really learnt anything much at school either about us. And there was stuff on the reserve that you know, some of the old people told. But what had happened too is that under some of those policies, we were forbidden to practice our culture on those reserves. We were forbidden to speak our language. So the old people, I still remember hearing some of the old people speak in some of the language, and we just used words. We picked up some of the words, and I still speak some of the words now. But when you think about it, we were under the government control under first the Aboriginal Protection Act and then the Aboriginal Welfare Act. The Aboriginal Protection Act took us off the traditional lands and brought us together and put us on the reserves like Iranbi. The Aboriginal Welfare Act then wanted to take us off the reserves and move us into town to assimilate us. And so when you think about all this, I wonder we're a little bit confused sometimes. And when you think about, okay, when we were on the reserve under the Aboriginal Protection Act, when we weren't allowed to practice our culture, we weren't allowed to own property, we weren't allowed to speak our language, do our dances, do our songs, like those gorgeous young children did at the high school today, you know, with the artwork on them and the pride. I just looked at those young kids today and I saw that pride and I thought, wow, that is fantastic. Let's keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. But you still have to understand some of those things that happened in the past to us. And so we weren't allowed to, we couldn't go off the reserve unless we asked the permission of the mission manager. If you came off the reserve, if you went back on the reserve. But one of the worst things that the government did, and I'm not saying any individuals here, but this was policy. It is real. It's what happened. And the worst thing, I think, one of the worst things, is they took our babies away. They took our children away. They took them away from family, culture, land, and they put them into institutions they called homes. The babies went down to Bomaderry, and when they became a certain age, around about 11, 12, the girls were getting separated and put into Bomaderry, into Cootamundra, down south, and the boys were taken away and put up into Kempsey. That was from about the 1880s right up until the 1970s that this happened. And folks, it's right there in our country. It's right there in our backyard. This is what happened. And for too long, I think there's been parallel society amongst us as Aboriginal people, and I hate to do this, but I will do it for the exercise, us as Aboriginal people and the rest of the town. And you can go into any little town around this country and you'll see these parallel societies happening. What do we need to do so that we can all come together? Caroline mentioned Aboriginal reconciliation. You know, I see hope with our young kids at the school and what's happening with Robin, you know, being there and Cheryl and Harry. I think we've got Harry somewhere. You know, being there in our schools. We need this, but we need to say we care. And I'm sure we all do, but we need to say to our people, we need to say to our kids, I care about you. You are important. You contribute to society. What you have to offer is important to us. I'm sorry, look at this little message stick's gone off on me. You didn't tell me this goes off with little light and everything. So I just really wanted to mention about these policies because it was there, folks. It was a reality. It did exist. My mother actually took us down to Sydney when I was about 11. So I went to the public school here. As I said, I didn't go to the high school. As a matter of fact, that high school wasn't built up there when I was going to school. But my mother wasn't well either. And she went down to Sydney and I went to high school down there. But my mother always wanted me in particular, being the youngest one, but the youngest girls wanted us to have a good education. So we went to Sydney and I went to high school. I went to an all-girls high school and we talked, with Christine and I was talking a little bit earlier about it, and they had C class, A, B and C class. And I was always in the A class. I loved school. I loved education. I always did well in high school and I loved learning, and I continue to learn every single day. I know I do know a few things, but every day is a learning, and I take that as a learning opportunity every single day. Don't close your mind to anything I say to people. And I was in the A class. My poor old mother was a pensioner, and she used to pay out of the pension, which wasn't much, but she used to pay a shilling a week. Some of us may remember a shilling. She used to pay a shilling a week to the school for my textbooks, and I was given the second-hand textbooks so that I could do my work. We didn't have things like study grants or any of those things when I was at school. We didn't have Centrelink. We didn't have job network places. I did well at school. When I left school, I got a job about 2 weeks after, and we call them clerical assistants or whatever. So I got a job in the office because when I was at school, I learned to touch type. People look at me now and they go, oh, she touch types. And because I wanted to do that, and I wanted to learn commerce and business. Because if you go into the other classes, you learn how to sew and cook, and there was no way I was going to do that. Forget it. You know, marry a rich man, you don't have to cook. So they tell me. And so when life for me was a little bit quiet until I went to the Foundation for Aboriginal Affairs. Some of you may know Charlie Perkins. Yep. We've had a lot of people in our history, in Aboriginal history, that have actually fought in different ways for the betterment of Aboriginal people. Right back until from 1788 when Captain Arthur Phillip set up the colony in Sydney, and we had a fighter by the name of Pemulwuy. You may have heard of Pemulwuy. And we had another man by the name of Bennelong. Now, Bennelong was this man who, wanted to meet Captain Arthur Phillip, wanted to learn the language, so they swapped, they learned each other's language, and Captain Arthur Phillip picked Bennelong as somebody he can talk to, and they befriended each other, they became friends, and so Bennelong was then the go-between his people and Captain Arthur Phillip. Pemulwuy, on the other hand, fought guerrilla warfare for 20 years against Phillip's soldiers. In the end, Pemulwuy and his son Tedbury, he was captured, they chopped off his head, they put it in a jar and pickled it and sent it over to London, and it was hanging in London Bridge for a long, long time to show what you do if you disobey, the powers to be in the colony. And when I think about it, and I hope they don't sue me, but I think about those things today. And there was another one I think was really, really interesting in the colonies. There was a man by the name of Lieutenant Dawes, who was in the Navy. Well, he befriended this Aboriginal woman called Patagarang. Now, they became friends. I don't know if they were lovers, but they were friends. And together, they wrote the first Aboriginal English dictionary. Dawes learned to speak Gadigal, and Patagarang, who was a Gadigal woman, learned to speak English. And I love that story, because I think for us, Patagarang was our first student. Those stories, and when I think about it today, what may be similar today, and I think about maybe the Noel Pearsons or the Warren Mundines, some of you may know these gentlemen today. They, to me, are the Bennelongs, who want to go and create that balance or that understanding or that communication between the government of today and our people. When you think of the Pemulwuy and our own Windradyne here, in the Lachlan Valley, I think of people like Gary Foley. Who's heard of Gary Foley? A bit of a radical, isn't he? And Charlie Perkins. And so when I first met Charlie Perkins, I was about 16 and Charlie was about 25. And there was a whole lot of us young people, including Gary Foley, who went to the foundation. And it was not our first political learning, because my father was a shearer, so he was very much a union man. Went out shearing, but when he came back, he wasn't allowed to drink in the pub. So he called himself a Maori. He's not married, so he could go and have a drink with his mates, because it was against the law for Aboriginal people to drink, but it was also against the law for anybody to buy Aboriginal people a drink. This picture theatre in the main street here, when I was a kid, it was roped off. Four seats in the front. That's where Aboriginal people sat out the front. You were not allowed to sit behind that. Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, white people, were not allowed to fraternise. Now that was very interesting when, under the Aboriginal Welfare or Assimilation Act, they gave us what was called a certificate of exemption. So if you proved to be clean living, if you wanted to send your children to school, if you wanted to get a job, if you wanted to go in the pub, you had to apply for what was called a certificate of exemption. And that exempted you from being an Aboriginal person. It exempted you from being an Aboriginal under the Aboriginal Welfare Act, identifying as an Aboriginal. So, a lot of our people wanted that, because they believe it gave our people and our kids, particularly being able to send the kids to school. And my cousins had that certificate of exemption, or what they was called a dog tag. But what that also meant is that your family, the Aboriginal family, you couldn't talk to them because it was against the law. Because you are now not an Aboriginal because you got the piece of paper. But what about your relatives? You can't talk to them. So there were some really, really strange policies. And we lived through those. I'll tell you a little story about my sister Sylvia, who was in one of the hotels in Sydney, in Redfern. And she went in and sat down at the hotel to have a beer. And the publican came up to her and said, you know, this is the 1960s. And said to my sister, sorry, but you're going to have to leave. You've got to leave the hotel. And she said, why? She said, well, you know, you can't drink here, you're an Aboriginal. You have to leave the hotel. So Sylvia said, well, just leave me with a bit of dignity, just let me finish it and I'll leave. And so, you know, what happened with our people? That dignity. What happened to the dignity if you're constantly saying you can't do it? If you constantly can't make decisions for yourself and you have to go and ask the master, what do you think that's going to do to your dignity? And of course, hey, there may be a bit of rebellion there as well. So this was in my lifetime. We lived under the Aboriginal Welfare Act, and indeed, apartheid in South Africa was taken from here, from Australia. So when apartheid was set up in South Africa in 1949, they looked here and saw how the government was treating Aboriginal people, segregated on reserves. And I say this to people and they go, huh, tell what happened in South Africa. Hey, what happened here in Australia? So it wasn't until the 1940s that our people were actually allowed into the public school. So I, as the youngest person in the family of 11, was the first one to graduate from high school. And I did that in Sydney. And as I said, I loved school anyway. Did really well in school. But, you know, living in the city too, I still, I guess, congregated with my family. In those days, the sorts of jobs that our people had was on the railway, or cleaning job, or manual labour, all those sorts of things. It wasn't until the 1960s that our people started graduating from university, Mr. Charlie Perkins being one of them. 1960. Folks, who was here in 1960? Who was alive in 1960? It's in our lifetime, folks, isn't it? You know, it's in our lifetime that these things happen. And all I'm saying to you, you know, it's a reality, it's there. There may be some people who may be a little bit bitter about the history. But what I'd like Australia to do is to acknowledge. Kevin Rudd says sorry, you know, to the Aboriginal people for the stolen generation. At least that's starting to heal the wound. You've now got people who, our people, who are going on, we've got doctors now. We've certainly got solicitors and barristers. We had one judge, Mr. Bob Blair, but unfortunately Mr. Bob Blair passed away. We do not have a judge. If you go to Sydney, I will put a challenge to you. You name how many Aboriginal people are on the local council. How many Aboriginal people on the Shire Council here in Cowra? Or anywhere around? Do you think it's possible? Sorry, did you say there's someone? Yeah? No? Do you think it's possible that we can get some Aboriginal people on the Shire Council?
My daughter's there.
Is she? Is she a councillor?
She works there.
Oh no, I'm saying about a councillor making the decisions.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the policies, making policy decisions. Do you think that's possible? When you look at the politicians, Ms. Linda Burney, I don't know if she's related to Uncle Chappie here, but I don't know. Anyway, so Ms. Linda Burney is now in state parliament. We've got one Aboriginal person there. Federal Parliament, we've got one there at the moment, Ken Wyatt. Does anybody know who else was at the federal level in any Aboriginal people? Mr. Aidan Ridgway and Mr. Neville Bonner. So 3 since 1788. Yeah, Mr. Neville Bonner, lovely man. In the Northern Territory we've got a few that's coming through now. So, you know, we as Aboriginal people are capable of doing all of these things. We are capable of a good education. We're capable of getting the good jobs. But listen, we need to work together. My heart was gladdened when I saw thousands and thousands of people walking together over the bridge, you know, for our rights. If any of you saw in 1988 for the bicentenary, people came from all over the world and marched down George Street. I mean, what a sight to see. Just thousands and thousands of people who come together. But the fight hasn't been easy. As I said, we fought for citizens' rights. We fought for land rights. We set up the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Canberra because the Prime Minister at the time, Mr. William McMahon, just yell out if I'm talking too much and I'll go over time, just let me know. Mr. William McMahon said to Aboriginal people, well, you can lease your own land. We're not going to give you land. We're not going to give you the land back because it's not yours. So we'll let you lease the land. And so you have people like Uncle Chappie who went down to Parliament House at the Aboriginal Tent Embassy and sat there, and Mr. Harold Blair designed the Aboriginal flag to go with that tent embassy, because the young lads who went down there at the time said, well, if we're not classed as citizens in our own country, then we'll put up our own embassy. And the embassy, that was in 1972, sorry. I was there. 1970, I was there when the police came around and threw us all over the place too. And it's still standing today, because the Aboriginal people said until we get sovereignty in this country, then we're not going to move. But how do we do that if we're not talking to each other? How do we get things happening? Aboriginal reconciliation might be one way of doing that, coming together. But it's very, very small steps. How do we do it in a place like Cowra? You know, I mix it with anybody and everybody. I've got lots of friends. You know, I've got friends who are ministers and premiers and doctors and lawyers, and you know, we'll mix it with everybody. Our own people, anybody else. But it has to be a little bit more meaningful. We can go through and we can get our people to go through the education system, fantastic. We can get our people to get good jobs, and of course you have to have a good education to have a good job. You have to be healthy to hold on to that job. So that big cycle has to be working in harmony. And of course our culture and our spirituality. And whatever that spirituality means for you, whatever that may be. It all needs to be working in harmony, and we need to be working in harmony together in this country. Because I think we're too separated, and we've been too separated for too long. And you can go around to any little town in this country, and you'll see separation. But folks, there's lots of opportunities for us to come together. I mean, these lovely ladies who invited me and who are looking after me, as well as my relatives who are here tonight. We don't have to sit in separate houses. Look, and I've got to say something, Christine, I really, really appreciate you hosting me. But that's the first white house that I have been in this town. And I'm 63 years old. In this town. And thank you very much for having me. You're just, you know, wonderful host. But there's a lot there, and we can't turn a blind eye to it. You know, I can't say, I've made it. You know, I've got a good job. I can do this, I can do that. I've been lucky enough to have a good education and been very well supported by a whole lot of people, particularly my mother. And you know, I've got a good family as well, and my family have done. I've got to tell you this story, ladies and gentlemen, about my sister Sylvia. My sister Sylvia was the first one to do Welcome to Country in Sydney. She did it. Our friend Meredith Bergman was the leader of the House in State Parliament, and it was for Queen Elizabeth or something like that. So Meredith said, really, you know, these people need to be invited to Aboriginal country. And so Sylvia does Welcome to Country, she did Welcome to Country for people like the Queen of England and the Governor and all the, you know, and Desmond Tutu, she did Welcome to Country for him. But she did this for Princess Anne, Princess Royal. She must be a real hoot, that lady. And so Sylvia wanted a cup of tea, and she said to Princess Anne, she said, excuse me. She said, I don't know the protocol. She said, but I'm dying for a cup of tea. Do I have to wait for you to get your cup of tea first? And of course, Princess Royal said to Sylvia, "Oh, no, Auntie Sylvia. Would you like a cup of tea? I'll get you one." And she did. You know, the little Corrie girl from your ammunition, Princess the Queen of England's daughter, gets her a cup of tea. You know, look, it is really easy, but it isn't. But we have to have the goodwill. I know everybody has a good heart. And, you know, and I know I'm preaching to the converted who is here tonight. But we have to have the goodwill to want to work together, otherwise it's not going to work. And we'll spend another 200 years, you know, in separate communities in our own little towns. I mean, Cara's big, but it's not as big as Sydney, folks. You know, I was part of the Aboriginal Black Power movement, if you like. Radical young 16, 17 years old, you know, the Vietnam War and the Black Power movement. And some of us had that big frizzy hair and all of that sort of stuff. It's quite radical, and we just wanted to do, and we set up the first Aboriginal organisations in this country. Well, not the first, but first radical ones maybe. Sorry, we had some other ones. We had the Aboriginal Welfare League in Melbourne, and we had One People in Brisbane, and then we had the Foundation for Aboriginal Affairs here in Sydney. Over there in Sydney. And there was another club, the Calabria Club in Perth. But then after, when we set up the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, and we came together and we said, some of our folks went over and had a look and saw what the Black Panthers were doing in Los Angeles. And so we set up the first Aboriginal Health Service and the first Aboriginal Legal Service, and I was part of setting up Marawina Aboriginal Preschool, that we've got Yalbalinga here now. But that was the first totally fully run Aboriginal early childhood full day care centre run for Aboriginal people. And in our first constitution it was Aboriginal women only. Sorry. You know, we could get away with an awful lot of things in those days that you certainly can't get away with today. And the reason why we did that is we said we know what's best for our children, what we want for our children. So we set up those organisations that we know has affected the rest of Australia. You have then got free legal aid. You then got Medicare. That all came out of the establishment of Aboriginal organisations. That was set up by Aboriginal people. And then we had to go to the government and ask them for some financial support. And that's how those organisations were set up. And I think in the Aboriginal Medical Service, for example, right across the country, there's about 300 of them. That's run by Aboriginal people. Not enough doctors. We've got a lot of health workers, Aboriginal health workers. And unfortunately, the health of our people is still pretty poor in a lot of areas. We said something like 8 out of 10 Aboriginal people across this country suffer from sugar diabetes and related illnesses. So those issues are still there. But we know we can move forward and we know we can do better. You know, I hope I haven't been preaching things like divisiveness or anything like that. I'm just trying to point out, I think it's really important, and I'll just read this. This country does have the capacity, and I'm sure most that are willing to embrace Aboriginal culture as a fundamental aspect of who we are as Australians. Acceptance, tolerance, sharing. These are the values to which we must aspire to in this country. Remember, Aboriginal history is Australian history. Aboriginal culture is part and parcel of Australian history. You can't compartmentalise Aboriginal people, our culture, our history, and sit us in a little box in the corner and pull it out every now and again and say, oh, we've got Aboriginal culture here. Oh, we've got Aboriginal people here. You just can't do that. I know that people care. People want to contribute. And we do need to work together. Don't blame the victim and don't play the victim. Either one of us. It takes the effort of the community as a whole to make a difference and be whole, not just one side, not just either side. It may be one step forward and one step backwards, but please do not stand still. We need to make those changes, and we need to be open-minded and caring and lend out and reach out that open hand. Let's have a look where we can employ Aboriginal people in our towns. All of those gorgeous young people at the school this morning, where are they going to go when they leave school? Are they going to stay here in Cowra and get good jobs? Or do they have to go to Sydney or Orange or somewhere else, or Dubbo, to get a job? And not just because they're Aboriginal specific jobs either. Where can you, personally, individually, and I'll put that challenge out to you, where individually, as a citizen of Cowra, can you make a difference? Where can Cowra as a whole make a difference? I wouldn't mind coming back here in a couple of years' time and seeing those differences. Look, take care everyone. Good health to you all. I really appreciate all of you coming and listening to me. I hope I haven't sounded too radical. I haven't. And sometimes I think we need to say some of these things. But I just wanted to finish off with saying, look, I think my journey has been a great journey. I've loved my journey. I've loved coming off Irambi Mission, and that journey, it's been hard. It hasn't been easy at all. Particularly, when my mother was so ill and her journey, my family's journey, what we've done. But you won't get that done if you just sit back and sit still. When the door opens, step through, and that's what I like to say to those gorgeous young children at the school. We can't do it for ourselves. Let's do it for our future generations, so the next generation that we see in the future will be much, much brighter and much better. Thank you, everyone. I think I'm open for questions if you want.